Hello everyone and welcome to another video. It's generally not too difficult to keep your guests happy, as these simpletons are relatively easy to satisfy. But what if you couldn't? What if your guests simply lacked the entire ability to feel joy and were perpetually sad or angry? How would this impact the game? Can you even beat it at all? First, we're going to just build a park, see how that goes and see what kind of obstacles we run into. And after that, we're going to see which scenarios are and which are not possible when every guest is a sad, empty husk. For this first experiment, we're going to try to complete the build your own Six Flags park scenario, which has a goal of 1500 guests and 600 park rating at the end of year 4. After having built the usual merry-go-round, pretty soon we've got our first guests coming in. Taking a look at these grumpy fellows reveals that their usual joy is replaced by utter sadness. The standard maximum for happiness is 255, but I changed it so that this maximum is now just 80. I could have made it 0, but for reasons we'll come to later, that would have made this pretty much impossible. In the current situation, I do understand their sadness though, as I would also be sad in a park with just a merry-go-round, so let's build some more rides. First, a good old corkscrew coaster with an ultra steep lift hill and a track through the loop, and then also a looping coaster with interlocking vertical loops. In early April, we have a grand total of 38 guests and a park rating of just 330, which is honestly really pathetically low. Or at least it would be under normal circumstances, but with perpetually unhappy guests, this is to be expected. The rate at which new guests spawn is mainly determined by your park rating. The base probability that a guest will spawn on a certain game tick is 50 out of 65,536, which is then increased depending on your park rating. If your rating is 200 or less, it stays at 50, and after that it goes up linearly with the rating. So if you have 400 park rating, your guest probability is 50 plus 200, which is 250, 5 times as high as with just 200 park rating. It maxes out at a park rating of 850, at which point your guest probability is 700. This will get you about 175 guests a month, but since our park rating is in the low 300s, our guest probability is much lower with roughly 170 instead of 700. This already leads to very few guests being spawned, but it's even worse as we got incredibly unlucky and rolled the 1 in 17 chance to be nominated for the most disappointing park award at the start of April. Due to our very low park rating, we do qualify for this, and this award lowers our guest spawning rate by another 25%. Okay, but why is our park rating so low? Well, a very large portion of the park rating comes from the happiness of the guests, which is exactly what we don't have. This is a breakdown of our park rating, and here you can see that we get 0 out of 500 rating from guest happiness, as 0 of our guests count as happy. They need at least 128 happiness to be considered happy, significantly more than our maximum of 80. If I use a plugin to override this and force all the guests to have a brief respite and be happy anyway, we do get this bonus and the park rating shoots up to almost 850, nearly maxing out the guest spawning rate. We can't get this though, so we'll have to get our rating from other sources. You get 1 point for every 13 guests in the park, maxing out at 2000 guests for 153 points, but we can't influence that directly right now. The ones we can influence are the points you get from the rides. The 200 points from the average ride uptime is easy, as you just need to have enough mechanics around. Maybe you'll lose a few points cause rides break down sometimes, but it won't be much. You can also get points from the average and total excitement and intensity ratings of your rides, so we should really build some more of those, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, I could just spam microcoasters, but I want to build a proper park with normal roller coasters now. Optimizing is something we'll do later when we try to beat all the scenarios under these circumstances, but for now a normal park it is. Half a year into this run, at the start of July, we still only have 165 guests in the park and only about 440 park rating. This is below the average of 188 guests per half year that we need to get to the goal of 1500 after 4 years, and our park rating is also still below the required 600. They are both increasing though, and as the park rating increases, guests will start spawning faster too, so there's no reason to panic yet. I could also simply run some advertisement campaigns, as those spawn guests independently of the park rating, and we'd have enough in no time, but hey, that's no fun. If we look at the park rating, we see that we still do well for the points from average ride uptime, and the points from the ride stats are increasing too. We've actually maxed out that from the average excitement rating, which is only 0.03 points away from the ideal average of 3.68. Our average intensity is too low though, as the ideal value for that is weirdly high at 5.20. We have a good variety of rides in the park, with a launched freefall, an enterprise and several big coasters, including one with 10.5 intensity, but despite that, the gentle rides still drag it down too much. I've checked a bunch of my earlier parks and I've never reached an average intensity of 5.2, I'm usually at least a point below it. The exception is parks where guests prefer more intense rides, but there you need to be far above it, so this average of 5.2 is very rare to be reached naturally. To help us out, I've built this extremely intense roller coaster, which is launched at 96 km an hour and does 20 laps. Its intensity rating of 36 does overcompensate a bit and our average is now nearly 6, but that will go down over time as we build more rides. These kinds of rides are usually used to increase the park value by a lot due to their high intensity ratings, and I never expected them to be useful for something else, but it's great that they do have a second, albeit extremely obscure, use now. By now we have also reached the maximum score for total excitement and intensity and got a total of 200 points from that, pushing our park rating above 500. It's not quite 600 yet, but it's slowly getting there. At the end of year 1 we have about 440 guests, which now is, thanks to the higher park rating, above the average of 375 per year that we need to reach the goal. The park rating is still increasing only very slowly though, which is because we've gotten out pretty much all the points we can get, except the ones from the guest count. I'm going to stop building rides now and just let the park run for a while. This isn't because I'm lazy, well maybe a little bit, but it's mostly because we've nearly run out of money. The guests pay for the park entry here, and while we can charge quite a lot and the guests are fairly rich, we still can't make more than a few thousand a month as we just get very few guests. You can borrow up to 100,000 euros from the bank in this scenario, and we're already at 79,000, so it's a good idea to pay some of that back. In the meantime, we can observe some of the behavior of our guests and see how it's different from happy guests. Let's first answer the question, why did I make the maximum happiness 80 and not just 0? This would not change the park rating, as all our guests are already considered to be unhappy, but it would impact how long guests stay in the park. This is the same park, but empty and in a version of the game where the guest happiness is capped at 0. Let's see what happens when we run all ads at all times. This spawns a lot of guests and our guest count is increasing quickly, but then it maxes out at about 600. Guests are still spawning quickly, but at the same time the old ones are leaving very quickly too. Why? Because they're too unhappy. After guests have ridden at least one ride, there are 3 possible reasons for them to leave: being tired, being broke, and being unhappy. If their happiness is below 45, then every so often there's a chance that they will want to go home, and that's why I needed to allow for the guests to be at least somewhat happy. They'll also want to leave if they've been in the park for a few minutes and haven't ridden a ride yet. This is usually not a big problem, but unhappy guests are more strict with their intensity and nausea preferences, so we need a wide variety of rides to make sure to cater to everyone. We do this pretty well with rides ranging from a merry-go-round to big scary coasters, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. What is a bit of an issue is that guests will never ever buy souvenirs. I have a few photo sections and some hat stalls, but they are all entirely useless since guests will never buy souvenirs if their happiness is less than 115. I didn't realize this during the run, and later on you might see some balloon stalls appear, which are equally useless. It's a shame, as we could have really used the extra income from selling that stuff. In April year 3 we finally reach a park rating of 600, and we're also quite close to our goal of 1500 guests, and that with still over 1.5 years to go. So we're gonna make it, but let's see if we can manage to reach the maximum park rating possible. Currently we're missing 47 points from the guest count and 2 points from the average ride uptime. As the rides get older they will break down more and more, so it's now time to use that money we earned in the past year and a bit to refurbish the rides and try to get the uptime to an average of 100%. In May year 4, just before we hit the 2000 guests we need for the maximum park rating, we suddenly start losing some guests, which is because they're broke. This is weird, as there are plenty of cash machines in the park, but a closer look reveals that they all have had 0 customers. That's because, just like with the souvenirs, guests will not use cash machines if their happiness is less than 115, which it always is. To combat this, I made every stall free and made sure that the guests had enough money left over after entering the park to not be considered broke. A month later, in June, we do reach the 2000 guests needed for the 153 park rating from the guest count, but despite my best efforts, we're not quite yet at 100% ride uptime. It's very close, but even brand new rides break down sometimes. After the compact inverted coaster broke down, it got fixed pretty much immediately, but it still went down to 98% uptime and screwed everything up. In the end, I resorted to just deleting this ride and also the Enterprise, which also had some downtime. This got us to 100% average uptime and the perfect park rating, or so I thought. I looked at the Park Rating Inspector plugin, which showed 653 and everything maxed out. But because it splits the excitement and intensity variables from the total and average ride stats, it rounds slightly differently than the game, and in reality we lost a point on the average excitement and intensity, only getting us to 652. Deleting the river rapids solves this problem, so in this post-mortem analysis we do reach the maximum of 653 park rating. In October we do start losing some guests because overcrowding is making them unhappier, and it doesn't take much to get their happiness down below the threshold for going home. Despite that, we do reach the goal with over 2000 guests. Okay, so Six Flags is doable even without advertising, but what about all the other scenarios? To start, anything that doesn't have a guest goal is doable. It may take quite a lot of time to get enough money to afford everything you need or to get enough guests to make enough profit from stalls or rides, but it is doable if you're patient. Guest goals are a different story though. The trickiest thing here isn't even necessarily the guest goal itself, but rather the park rating. It took us until year 3 to reach a rating of 600 in Six Flags, so is it even possible to do it in a single year like you need for Forest Frontiers? Yes it is, because with advertising you can get well over the 1300 guests you need to get to 600 park rating in a single year. Hang on, wait a minute, since when are the guests happy? How is that possible? I thought I eradicated all signs of joy from the universe. It turns out that there is a bug in this custom version of the game that allows peeps in queue lines with TVs to exceed the new maximum happiness of 80. Usually when there's an increase in the happiness target, it is bounded by this value K peep max happiness, which is usually 255, but I changed it to 80. An exception to this is the idle happiness update, which makes guests that aren't doing anything specific gravitate towards the halfway point of 127 happiness. But I also changed this so that they gravitate to 40 happiness. Another exception, which I didn't spot, is the queue line TVs, which just plainly give extra happiness without checking if it exceeds the maximum. Usually this isn't a problem, as TVs only increase the happiness up to 165, which is well below the maximum, but since I changed the maximum to 80, yeah, it can get above that. This is easily fixable, but it doesn't really matter as we're not actually going to play these scenarios, we're just doing a thought experiment. With advertising being so strong, any normal guest goal scenario where you can advertise is doable. But there are some exceptions. There is a scenario option that makes it harder to get a good park rating. The effect of this is rather simple, as all it does is subtract 100 from your rating. This makes the maximum possible park rating just 553, making any park rating goal impossible. But this option is never used in any official scenario, so we don't have to worry about it. What we do have to worry about is the scenarios where you can't ever let your park rating go below 700, like extreme heights. These are simply impossible. We can't get above 653, so on April 29th, at the earliest possible moment, the park will be shut down and we will fail the goal. These 2 months aren't enough to beat any of them, so these 12 scenarios are impossible if guests cannot be happy. We're now left with just Pickle Park, Fiasco Forest and Rainbow Summit. What they have in common is that you're not allowed to advertise. Pickle Park is definitely doable with 1400 guests in 3 years. We got more than that in our Six Flags run. The 2500 guests in 4 years of Rainbow Summit is harder but also doable. While we only had a little over 2000 guests in the park after 4 years in Six Flags, we did have over 3400 of them enter the park. So if we simply treble the guests and don't allow them to leave, then 2500 is perfectly possible. That now only leaves Fiasco Forest, and this is a different story. We need 900 guests in just a single year, and even though we do start out with some, we still need over 700 more. To see if this is possible, we will need to actually play it, which does also mean I do need to fix the Q-Line TV happiness bypass bug after all. On my first attempt to fix this, I simply divided the values of 90 and 165 that are used here by 3, as the maximum happiness is about 3 times lower as well, but that gave a new problem. I am planning to trap people in a queue line so that none of them will be able to ever leave the park, but with values this low, the TVs don't keep their happiness above the threshold for going home, so it doesn't work anymore. Instead, I'll do the same as is done everywhere else and keep the old numbers but cap it at the maximum of 80. Alright, the start of Fiasco Forest is a complete mess, so we're going to immediately sell everything and force all the guests to the front of the park with no entry signs. There are also some guests on the grass, which we can just pick up and put down in the correct spot. To save time, I'm doing all of this while the game is paused. If I need to build a thing, I just very quickly unpause, click and repause. To maximize guest spawning, we need the park rating to be as high as possible as soon as possible, and in order to maximize the points from ride stats, I designed this steel mini coaster. It's a reverse incline design that does 2 laps, and its stats are nearly exactly the ideal average for excitement and intensity, so if we just build a ton of these, then we'll max out the points for both the average and total ratings. Before March 1st has even ended, we've already got 25 of these rides. A day in March is only 13.2 seconds long, so while building all of this and relocating the guests, I've had the game unpaused for less than that. With all these rides, our soft guest cap is already taken care of as well, as everything together attracts more than 1500 guests. I'll be trapping all the guests in the queue line of the miniature railway. It's a free transport ride, so they will always go on it, and the no entry signs make them stay in the walking state while queuing. With guests being both in the walking state and the queuing state at the same time, you can pack an infinite amount of them on just a few tiles, while simultaneously keeping them happy enough with the TV so that they never want to go home. However, I ran into another issue. The TVs work fine now and aren't making the guests happier than the maximum of 80, but some of the guests that are already in the park refuse to become unhappy, as apparently they still have some sort of high target happiness. I could fix this in the code, but I can't be bothered to do that, so instead I'm just going to use the consistent guest stats plugin to change the happiness of every guest to 80 every few seconds, which is pretty much the exact happiness they'd be stuck at if my code works properly anyway. The setup is done now, so all we have to do is wait. Well, we do still have one job, and that is to make sure that we get an award every month to increase the guest spawning rate as much as we can. At the start of April, we get the award for best rollercoasters. Nice, that's an extra 25% guest generation for the next 5 months, as that's how long awards stay active. The next month, at the start of May, we don't get an award, as the one selected was one we don't qualify for. This is unacceptable, so we go back to when I saved the game a few days earlier, build another coaster and see if we get one now. You see, if you don't do anything after loading a save, it will always play out the same way, but if you perform an action, the seed for the random number generator will change, so maybe now we do get an award. And yes, indeed, we get the award for the most dazzling color schemes. Going into June, we again need to reset once before we get an award, but it's the most disappointing park award, which is a negative one that reduces the guest generation by 25%. On the third attempt, we do get a positive one in the form of the best value park award. At the start of July, we get, after a couple of resets, the most prestigious award of all, the Best Toilets Award. Never mind the fact that the toilets are all inaccessible and everyone is trapped in a queue line, the toilets are still impeccable. We now have the maximum of 4 awards running, which gives a massive times 2.44 boost to the guest spawning speed. And with this incredibly fast generation, we hit the goal of 900 guests before the end of July, which is incredible, but we're not quite there yet. There's also a 600 park rating requirement, which is more difficult because for that we need at least 1300 guests. Awards stay active for 5 months, so we don't have to worry about getting a new one for August, but we do for September, as that's when the first one expires. It took a few goes, but eventually we managed to get the safest park award to replace the one for best roller coasters. Every now and then a ride breaks down, ruining our perfect 200 park rating from ride uptime, but simply deleting and rebuilding it solves that issue. About halfway September September we reached 1300 guests and thus 600 park rating, and for the first time we fulfilled the goal requirements of Fiasco Forest. I honestly thought that the punchline of this playthrough would be that the 900 guests was just about possible, but that a year simply wasn't enough time to get enough guests for 600 park rating. But I underestimated the sheer power of combined awards. It's so strong that by the end of the year we've reached 1700 guests. Okay, we started with about 200, but that still leaves 1500 guests in a single year, and it's only gonna go faster after that. This shows that you don't even need advertising at all for any scenario. Even with perpetually unhappy guests, you can complete every scenario without advertising, except for those 12 where you're not allowed to let your park rating go below 700. And that was it for this video. I hope that you, unlike the guests, were happy while watching it. And if you were, you can click here to see what happens if guests explode upon thinking a negative thought. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.